The morning of October 22nd, 1944, dawned over the Philippine island of Leyte with a deceptive calm. Coral cliffs glimmered under a sun just beginning to pierce the lingering mist, and the dense jungle seemed to hum with the quiet patience of soldiers preparing unseen. In a small clearing, a solitary figure crouched beside a bundle of scrap metal and hoses, his hands stained with oil and fuel, his uniform already smudged from weeks of trial and error. The other engineers and ordnance officers had laughed at him earlier that week. They called his invention absurd, a flamethrower modification so cumbersome and unconventional that no sensible officer would ever approve it for frontline use. And yet, in the shadows of Leyte's rugged terrain, the first enemy fortresses were about to confront it, and within 24 hours, the mockery would turn to disbelief. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Samuel Whitaker had joined the chemical warfare section of the United States Army in 1942, shortly after the hard lessons of Guadalcanal and New Georgia had demonstrated the lethal efficiency of flamethrowers against Japanese field fortifications. Like many of his colleagues, Whitaker had trained in the standard M1A1 and M2 models backpacks of fire that weighed 70 pounds, capable of projecting napalm-fueled jets of flame up to 45 yards. But what troubled him most in early 1944 was not the weapon itself. It was the limitation imposed by the terrain and the defenders' ingenuity. Japanese engineers had learned to build pillboxes and concrete bunkers with ventilation systems that dissipated conventional flame, and interconnected cave networks that allowed garrisons to emerge and counterattack after an assault seemed to have cleared them. In Leyte, these challenges were multiplied by heavy rain, unstable coral soil, and dense foliage. The existing flamethrowers were too slow, too vulnerable, and too easily anticipated. Whitaker's solution, drafted in meticulous sketches at the engineers' barracks, was a modular flamethrower attachment designed to increase range, streamline fuel flow, and allow rapid reload under fire. To his peers, it appeared ridiculous, a contraption of hoses, reinforced copper nozzles, and improvised pressure regulators cobbled together from spare artillery equipment. Yet, Whitaker believed in the principle that had driven every advancement in Pacific incendiary warfare, that speed and adaptability could neutralize even the most meticulously prepared defenses. Across the islands of the Pacific, Americans had learned that the Japanese doctrine of fighting to the last man relied on confidence in their fortifications. Bunkers could resist artillery, endure aerial bombardment, and survive repeated infantry assaults, but fire that could penetrate every crevice, strike multiple apertures simultaneously, and adapt to unforeseen architectural quirks represented a paradigm shift. Leyte, with its steep ridges and isolated garrisons, was the testing ground. By mid-October, American intelligence had mapped 3 particularly resilient Japanese fortresses, each perched along ridgelines overlooking strategic supply routes. The first, dubbed Fortress Delta by recon teams, was a sprawling concrete network with 4-meter-thick walls, camouflaged with palm fronds and volcanic ash. The second, Fortress Echo, sat atop a limestone bluff and featured a labyrinth of interconnected bunkers and pillboxes, complete with trapdoors and ventilation shafts that had already frustrated 2 battalions of engineers attempting demolition. The third, Fortress Foxtrot, was less imposing in scale but notoriously lethal. Snipers and machine gunners positioned in narrow apertures had inflicted significant casualties on previous infantry patrols. To conventional ordnance officers, these positions were expected to resist flamethrower teams for days, perhaps weeks, and yet Whitaker's contraption promised to change that calculus entirely. The skepticism was nearly palpable during the final briefing. Major James Hollister, Whitaker's direct superior, gestured at the crude assembly of hoses and copper fittings laid out on a wooden crate. "Samuel, this monstrosity, you honestly expect men to carry this across open terrain under fire?" "It's absurd," Hollister said, his voice low but laced with concern. Whitaker met his gaze steadily. "It's absurd only until it works. The principle isn't weight, it's simultaneous penetration. These fortresses rely on sequential defense. One stream of concentrated flame at multiple points, and the defenders can't reorganize. It's not brute force, it's precision. No one fully believed him. Most officers envisioned catastrophic failures, fuel leaks, ruptured hoses, or worse, a flamethrower operator turned into a human torch before reaching the bunkers. Yet, the day of reckoning arrived with a clarity that left no room for doubt. By dawn on October 22nd, Whitaker and his small assault team had positioned themselves at the base of Fortress Delta. Recon had indicated 4 firing slits facing the approach, machine gun nests partially obscured by foliage, and a narrow path carved into the coral cliff. The team's plan was simple but dangerous. Advance under minimal cover, deploy Whitaker's modified flamethrower to simultaneously target all apertures, and coordinate with a demolition squad to neutralize secondary defenses. As the first light touched the ridge, the jungle erupted in the synchronized chatter of gunfire. Japanese sentries had spotted the approach, and tracer rounds stitched through the mist. Whitaker's men dropped to the ground, each rifleman calculating trajectories, keeping the defenders pinned while the captain readied his device. He could feel the familiar weight of napalm and pressurized gas strapped to his back, but the modification redistributed the mass in a way that allowed rapid adjustments mid-stride, a small, elegant innovation, hidden within the seeming absurdity. With a silent nod, he advanced. In moments, the first bursts of flame poured into Fortress Delta's apertures. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic for the defenders. Ventilation shafts funneled the fire through the interior, smoke and heat suffocating the garrison in seconds. By mid-morning, Fortress Delta was effectively neutralized. Reports later indicated that no more than 12 defenders escaped the interior, while the majority were incapacitated by the sudden, inescapable conflagration. Whitaker's team withdrew briefly, reloaded, and within the next 12 hours, repeated the procedure against Fortresses Echo and Foxtrot. By dusk, 3 of the most stubborn positions on Leyte's northern ridges had been reduced to smouldering ruins, leaving American forces stunned at the efficiency. The irony was not lost on the battalion officers who had mocked the device. What had seemed an impractical, almost comical invention had rewritten the operational expectations of fortified assaults in the Pacific. For Whitaker, the triumph was not personal. It was the vindication of a principle that had long guided incendiary tactics. Adaptation and innovation, no matter how unconventional, could outpace even the most meticulously constructed defenses. The night after the first wave of assaults, Leyte's northern ridges were eerily silent. Smoke still curled from the smouldering ruins of Fortresses Delta, Echo, and Foxtrot, drifting into the dense canopy. Whitaker and his team bivouacked near the remains, exhausted but aware that victory was only partial. Japanese counterattacks were expected at dawn, and intelligence suggested more fortifications lay hidden deeper into the jungle. Yet, for the first time, American commanders began to take the absurd flamethrower seriously. The modification Whitaker had devised was deceptively simple in principle but ingeniously engineered in execution. Standard M2 flamethrowers had long been criticized for their rigidity in assault scenarios. A single nozzle, limited arc, and cumbersome refueling process meant operators were vulnerable during critical moments. Whitaker's device, by contrast, employed a dual-barrel design with an adjustable manifold, fed by 2 smaller auxiliary tanks in addition to the main fuel supply. This allowed a single operator to project 2 simultaneous streams at slightly divergent angles, effectively covering multiple apertures without repositioning. A system of manual valves and reinforced hoses allowed the operator to switch between a high-pressure concentrated burst and a lower-pressure sustained flow, adaptable to ventilation, bunker depth, and structural integrity. Equally important was the rapid reload mechanism. Conventional procedures required an assistant to manually swap out pressurized tanks, a process that could take up to 3 minutes under fire. Whitaker integrated a quick connect coupling system, reducing reload time to under 30 seconds, a critical margin when facing machine guns, snipers, and occasional artillery harassment. In addition, small copper nozzles were angled with precision to exploit the architecture of typical Japanese pillboxes, firing slits, ventilation shafts, and minor structural gaps. The result was not simply a heavier flamethrower. It was a system designed to exploit the predictable human psychology of defenders' panic in the face of multiple simultaneous threats. On the morning of October 23rd, the modified flamethrower was tested in a field simulation against mock-up pillboxes constructed from reinforced concrete and salvaged timber. Whitaker's team noted several important operational insights. First, the dual streams reduced exposure time dramatically. Whereas conventional operators might need 7 to 10 seconds per aperture, the modified system could cover 4 to 6 points in roughly the same duration, maximizing fuel efficiency and minimizing vulnerability. Second, the quick connect reload allowed sustained engagement across multiple fortifications without the team halting to resupply, maintaining tactical momentum. Third, even in adverse weather, torrential rain, high humidity, or volcanic ash, the device maintained consistent pressure and ignition reliability, a testament to the careful calibration of the nitrogen propellant and the ignition cartridges. By the afternoon, reconnaissance confirmed that Japanese defenders had regrouped, attempting to re-establish observation posts atop secondary ridges near fortresses Delta and Echo. These positions were less fortified but no less lethal. Whitaker's team moved at first light, coordinating with rifle squads for suppressive fire. The psychological effect of the prior day's assaults became immediately apparent. Japanese sentries, aware that their primary fortresses had been destroyed almost instantly, hesitated in their positions. In some cases, defenders abandoned partially camouflaged pillboxes without waiting to engage, leaving rifles and ammunition strewn across the undergrowth. Whitaker later described this in a post-action report. The enemy's reaction was almost clinical. Positions that should have been defended with the same determination as the previous day were empty. It was as if the fire had forced a re-evaluation of what could be held. Such reactions were precisely the intent. Historical studies of Pacific Island fortifications emphasized the psychological dimension of warfare. Japanese soldiers were trained in a doctrine that emphasized unwavering defense. A bunker was not merely a defensive structure, but a moral anchor, a symbol of honor that demanded resistance to the last man. Whitaker's modification exploited the intersection of material and psychological vulnerability, the capacity to destroy both the physical structure and the defender's confidence simultaneously. By late afternoon, the second wave of assaults began on smaller, previously underestimated fortifications along the coastal approach to Leyte's northern plains. Here, the dual-stream system demonstrated another advantage, the ability to saturate complex, multi-chambered bunkers. Reports later documented that a single operator could flood an interconnected pillbox network, igniting interior storage areas and producing smoke and heat sufficient to force evacuation within seconds. This was not achieved through brute force alone. Careful observation, pattern recognition, and pre-assault mapping were critical. Whitaker had insisted on detailed reconnaissance, integrating aerial photography, human intelligence, and captured maps to identify likely ventilation shafts and firing apertures. The logistical backbone of the operation was equally critical. Each flamethrower operator carried approximately 75 pounds of fuel and propellant, distributed across the dual-barrel system. Teams of 2 assistants and 4 riflemen accompanied each operator, providing cover, reloading assistance, and emergency extraction if necessary. Supply lines were reinforced by jeep convoys and pack mules, ensuring that the operators could sustain multiple engagements in a single day. Reports from the Philippine campaign in 1944 indicate that American units frequently suffered bottlenecks when flamethrower fuel ran low mid-assault. Whitaker's innovation, combined with careful pre-positioning of auxiliary tanks, mitigated this risk entirely. The first assault of October 24th, targeting a cluster of smaller ridgeline fortresses, codenamed by intelligence officers as Gamma, Hotel, and Juliet, highlighted the full operational potential of the modified system. Each fortress had been estimated to hold between 25 and 50 defenders, with interconnected machine gun nests and concealed sniper positions. Reconnaissance had noted that Gamma included a ventilation shaft network unusually deep, extending at least 30 feet underground. Conventional flamethrower teams would have required multiple bursts, exposing themselves to concentrated return fire. Whitaker's system, however, allowed a single operator to project dual streams simultaneously into multiple apertures, igniting interior wood supports and causing smoke and heat to permeate the underground chambers. Within 20 minutes, Gamma was effectively neutralized. Hotel and Juliet, situated within 200 meters of Gamma, were approached sequentially, but the psychological effect of Gamma's destruction was evident. Defenders hesitated, some abandoning their positions entirely, while others attempted to fortify secondary shelters that were themselves rendered untenable by the modified system. Eyewitness accounts from riflemen supporting the operation described an almost surreal scene. Sergeant Alan McBride, assigned to the cover team for Whitaker, wrote in his field journal, "We watched in disbelief. The bunkers were designed to resist everything, artillery, grenades, everything we had tried before. Yet the fire seemed to reach every crack. Men fled as if the heat itself had eyes, marking them for retreat." Such reactions illustrate a key principle of Pacific warfare. While material strength was essential, the human element often determined the outcome. Japanese doctrine assumed a linear, sequential threat from conventional infantry and artillery. The unexpected dimension of simultaneous, multi-aperture flamethrower fire disrupted their mental model, inducing confusion and panic. By the end of October 24th, the three fortresses, Gamma, Hotel, and Juliet, had been cleared in less than 24 hours. Official battle reports emphasized the efficiency of the operation, noting that casualties among American operators were significantly lower than in prior Pacific engagements. Whitaker's modification had reduced exposure time, minimized reload vulnerabilities, and allowed coordinated suppression without sacrificing speed. In contrast to earlier campaigns, where entire flamethrower teams were incapacitated by concentrated defensive fire, this operation highlighted a remarkable improvement in survivability and tactical impact. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yet, the success came at a cost. Despite careful planning, minor incidents occurred. A ruptured hose in Hotel's southern bunkers caused a minor fuel spill, briefly threatening the operator. A miscalculated trajectory in Juliet allowed a small fire to ignite prematurely, forcing a temporary retreat and exposing the team to sniper fire. Whitaker documented these failures meticulously, emphasizing that even in innovative operations, discipline, redundancy, and training were essential. The broader significance of the operation extended beyond immediate tactical gains. Leyte, at this stage of the campaign, represented a critical foothold in the Philippines. Control of northern ridges and inland routes directly influenced American supply lines, artillery positioning, and subsequent amphibious landings. The psychological effect on Japanese defenders cannot be overstated. Reports indicate that units isolated further south began reinforcing fortifications not merely with materials, but with a heightened fear of flamethrower teams capable of penetrating even the strongest defenses. In other words, Whitaker's modification had shifted the operational calculus. A fortress could no longer guarantee safety by virtue of construction alone. The success also resonated through American command structures. General Douglas, MacArthur's staff, observed the efficiency with which small, well-coordinated teams could neutralize multiple fortifications in rapid succession. Operational doctrine began to reflect this insight, emphasizing specialized units, modular incendiary systems, and pre-assault reconnaissance as force multipliers. Whitaker himself was modest about his contribution, emphasizing that the device was the result of cumulative experience across Guadalcanal, New Georgia, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, lessons in material engineering, human psychology, and battlefield adaptation distilled into a single, portable innovation. By dusk on October 24th, Leyte's northern ridges were effectively under American control. Whitaker's team withdrew to a staging area, Their modified flamethrowers partially disassembled for transport and maintenance. They had survived unscathed, a testament to careful preparation and tactical discipline. Japanese fortifications, once considered virtually impervious, had been reduced to smouldering ruins. For the first time in the Philippine campaign, a small, specialized team had rewritten the expected timeline of fortress neutralization, achieving in hours what conventional doctrine had predicted would take days or weeks. In post-action debriefings, officers who had doubted Whitaker's device were candid in their reassessment. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Gaines, who had overseen previous assaults on similar positions with standard M2 teams, admitted, "We mocked it at first, thought it was impractical. I cannot understate how wrong we were. The difference between yesterday's conventional assault and today's operation was like night and day. Efficiency, precision, speed, we had underestimated the value of innovation." The events of those 24 hours in October 1944 underscored a larger truth about Pacific warfare. Technological modification, combined with careful study of both material and human factors, could overturn assumptions grounded in years of doctrine. Whitaker's absurd flamethrower modification was more than a tool. It was an instrument of operational psychology, a method of leveraging fire, fear, and ingenuity to achieve results that brute force alone could not. The day after the three fortresses fell, Leyte's northern ridges were silent, except for the faint hiss of smouldering embers and the distant calls of scavenging birds. Whitaker and his team moved cautiously among the ruins, surveying the remains of concrete bunkers, collapsed timber supports, and scorched earth. The scale of destruction was unmistakable. Positions previously thought invulnerable had been neutralized in mere hours. What remained was a landscape that bore testimony to a fusion of ingenuity, tactical discipline, and the relentless logic of fire. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Gaines accompanied Whitaker on a post-action inspection. The colonel, who had initially dismissed the modification as impractical, walked through the wreckage with a mixture of astonishment and respect. He noted the alignment of burn marks, the depth to which flames had penetrated ventilation shafts, and the absence of extensive American casualties, a stark contrast to prior campaigns where conventional flamethrower teams often suffered high attrition. Gaines turned to Whitaker, his tone subdued. "I can't remember the last time we saw fortresses fall with such precision and so few losses. Your device changed the entire operational equation." Whitaker, ever methodical, focused not on accolades but on data. He recorded the lengths of burned tunnels, the effectiveness of nozzle angles, and the fuel consumption of each operation. Every measurement was a potential lesson for the next engagement. Yet, he allowed himself a quiet acknowledgement of what had been achieved, the transformation of an absurd idea into an instrument capable of reshaping battlefield expectations. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders in Leyte was immediate. Intelligence reports from captured officers revealed a mixture of shock, disbelief, and resignation. Previously, bunkers had been considered sanctuaries, anchors of both material defense and moral certainty. The sudden destruction of multiple fortresses within a single day shattered this confidence. Soldiers, isolated in nearby positions, began to fortify with heightened anxiety, often over-engineering defences to compensate for fear rather than tactical necessity. Some garrisons retreated from positions entirely, abandoning supplies and leaving artillery pieces unmanned. One Japanese officer noted in a field diary, "Fire came from everywhere at once. The shelters we trusted, the walls that could not be breached, were consumed. How is it possible? I cannot understand what has changed. We are no longer safe." American commanders recognized that the innovation's value extended beyond physical destruction. It had created a new strategic environment, in which defenders were forced to react unpredictably, often in ways that favored further assaults. Leyte's northern campaign highlighted a critical principle in modern warfare. Adaptation and technological ingenuity could reshape the psychological battlefield as decisively as the material one. Following the Leyte operations, the flamethrower modification underwent formal evaluation. Engineers from the chemical warfare section, field commanders, and even logistics officers examined Whitaker's design. The reports emphasized several critical findings. First, the dual-stream system reduced operator exposure time by nearly 40%, a significant margin in engagements where seconds could determine life or death. Second, the quick connect reload mechanism allowed sustained assaults over multiple targets without halting to refuel, providing tactical flexibility previously unattainable. Third, the precision of nozzle angles and fuel pressure adjustments permitted operators to neutralize complex, multi-chambered fortifications with a single coordinated effort, reducing material waste and maximizing operational efficiency. The evaluation concluded with a recommendation for further dissemination across Pacific units. Brigadier General William E. Hart, overseeing the Philippine campaign, praised the system in a memorandum to headquarters. Captain Whitaker's innovation demonstrates that field ingenuity, when disciplined and applied systematically, can achieve results that conventional doctrine alone cannot predict. The dual-stream modification should be integrated into all forward assault teams. Integration into wider operations, however, required careful logistical planning. Leyte's experience had highlighted the challenges inherent in flamethrower deployment: fuel supply, operator safety, and coordination with supporting infantry units were all critical variables. Whitaker collaborated with quartermasters to pre-position auxiliary tanks at forward supply points, coordinated with engineers to reinforce bridges and trails for safe transport, and trained additional operators in the principles of rapid reload, coordinated suppressive fire, and simultaneous multi-aperture targeting. The goal was to create a standardized doctrine that preserved the lessons of Leyte while extending the innovation's applicability across diverse Pacific theaters. The impact of Whitaker's work extended beyond tactical efficiency to influence operational planning at higher levels. Leyte was a critical stepping stone in General MacArthur's broader strategy to reclaim the Philippines and advance toward the Japanese home islands. Rapid neutralization of entrenched fortifications allowed American forces to secure supply routes more quickly, reduce attritional losses, and maintain operational momentum. MacArthur's staff incorporated the lessons learned into subsequent amphibious campaigns on Mindoro and Luzon, where modified flamethrower teams were deployed to neutralize fortified coastal positions and inland bunkers with unprecedented efficiency. Field accounts underscore the profound human dimensions of these operations. Riflemen who had previously witnessed the destruction of conventional flamethrower teams spoke of a psychological shift. Operators were no longer seen solely as high-risk volunteers, but as precision instruments whose actions could dictate the tempo of an assault. Sergeant Alan McBride, reflecting on Leyte months later, wrote, "Watching those fortresses fall in hours rather than days was like seeing the rules of war rewritten. We realized that courage alone wasn't enough. Innovation could multiply our effect while keeping us alive." For Japanese defenders, the lessons were stark and unambiguous. The assumption that fortifications alone guaranteed survival had been disproven. Officers and engineers noted in post-capture interrogations that structural improvements, additional fortifications, and even deeper tunneling could not compensate for the combination of rapid fire penetration and psychological dislocation created by Whitaker's system. The traditional doctrine of sequential defense, in which garrisons responded methodically to incremental attacks, was rendered obsolete when faced with simultaneous multi-aperture flame assaults. Whitaker's success also underscored the intersection of technology, psychology, and logistics. Leyte's operation demonstrated that battlefield innovation was not simply a matter of producing new weapons. It required careful study of enemy behavior, terrain, supply chains, and operational coordination. The dual-stream flamethrower was effective not merely because it was physically superior to previous models, but because it exploited predictable human reactions: hesitation, panic, and the instinctive desire to find shelter in positions previously considered secure. The aftermath of Leyte saw additional refinements. Engineers developed protect covers for nozzle joints to prevent debris from disrupting fuel flow, standardized auxiliary tank sizes for easier transportation, and reinforced pressure regulators to maintain consistent performance in humid or rainy conditions. Training manuals were updated to include lessons on multi-aperture targeting, quick connect reload procedures, and coordinated suppression with rifle squads. Whitaker personally oversaw the training of new operators, emphasizing meticulous observation of terrain, precise positioning, and disciplined fuel management. By early 1945, the principles demonstrated on Leyte were being applied in the Okinawa campaign. American assault teams, equipped with refined dual-stream flamethrowers and trained in rapid, coordinated assaults, achieved results that would have been inconceivable only months earlier. Historical analyses note that casualty rates among flamethrower operators decreased, while the time required to neutralize entrenched fortifications fell dramatically. Fortresses that might have required days to clear were often reduced within hours, echoing the precedent set by Whitaker's initial operations. The broader historical significance of Whitaker's work lies in the way it exemplifies the iterative nature of military innovation. Pacific campaigns had repeatedly demonstrated that conventional assumptions, structural invulnerability, sequential defense, and brute force assaults were insufficient. The modification, though initially dismissed as absurd, synthesized lessons from prior battles, field improvisation, and an understanding of human psychology into a tangible, highly effective system. It highlights a recurring theme in 20th century warfare. Small-scale innovation, when applied thoughtfully, can yield outsized strategic consequences. Whitaker's personal legacy, while less visible in grand strategic histories, was profound. Post-war evaluations recognized his contribution to tactical evolution in the Pacific theater. He received commendations from brigade and divisional commanders not solely for ingenuity, but for the careful documentation and training programs that ensured his innovation could be replicated safely and effectively. Oral histories from surviving riflemen and flamethrower operators frequently mention Leyte as the moment they realized that disciplined innovation could outperform brute strength. Reflecting decades later, Whitaker remarked in an interview with the U.S. Army Historical Division, "The idea was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about solving a problem that conventional methods couldn't. If that meant they laughed at it in the barracks, that was inconsequential. In the field, the results spoke for themselves." In this way, Leyte's northern ridges became a crucible for broader lessons in warfare. The physical destruction of 3 fortresses in 24 hours was remarkable in its own right. Equally remarkable was the psychological and doctrinal shift it engendered. Commanders recognized that battlefield assumptions could be overturned through careful observation, adaptation, and innovation. The operation demonstrated that technological modification, integrated with precise training and tactical foresight, could deliver effects disproportionate to the scale of the unit employed. For the Japanese defenders, Leyte was a stark confirmation that traditional doctrines of impregnable fortifications and sequential resistance were no longer sufficient. The combination of rapid-fire multi-aperture flamethrower technology, coordinated infantry support, and psychological disruption created a battlefield environment in which survival depended as much on adaptability as on courage. Captured diaries and post-war interviews reveal that the fear instilled by such operations persisted long after the fighting ended, influencing defensive planning and fortification construction in subsequent campaigns. In the broader context of World War II, Whitaker's Leyte operation exemplifies a recurring pattern. Small, targeted innovations can have far-reaching strategic consequences. From the improvised flamethrower solutions at Guadalcanal to the refined dual-stream system in Leyte, the Pacific theater demonstrated that victory was as much about adaptation, observation, and ingenuity as it was about numerical superiority or firepower. The lessons learned in these operations informed post-war doctrine on close-quarter assault, combined arms coordination, and the integration of specialized weapon systems into broader operational planning. By the end of October 1944, Leyte's northern ridges were secured, American forces were positioned to advance further inland, and the precedent of the absurd flamethrower modification had been firmly established. What had begun as a seemingly impractical experiment had reshaped tactical expectations, provided critical operational advantages, and demonstrated the enduring value of ingenuity under fire. In retrospect, the events of those 24 hours stand as a testament to the interplay of material innovation, human psychology, and disciplined execution, a microcosm of the broader evolution of Pacific warfare. Whitaker's contribution, though often overshadowed by larger strategic narratives, remains emblematic of a key lesson. In war, even the most improbable idea, when rooted in rigorous observation, tested engineering, and careful study of human behavior, can overturn assumptions, redefine effectiveness, and achieve results previously considered impossible. The three fortresses that fell in 24 hours are not just ruins on a Philippine ridge, they are monuments to the power of disciplined creativity in the crucible of combat. The weeks following the fall of Leyte's northern ridges were quiet in a way that belied the intensity of the battles just fought. American troops consolidated positions, repaired trails, and replenished supplies, while Japanese forces regrouped farther south, nursing the psychological wounds inflicted by a weapon once considered laughable. Whitaker, meanwhile, was tasked with overseeing the transfer of his modified flamethrowers to other forward units. It was a period of reflection as much as preparation, an opportunity to consider what had been achieved and what the implications might be for the remainder of the Philippine campaign. Whitaker's modification had changed more than just the tempo of operations, it had reshaped expectations. Before Leyte, flamethrowers were regarded as high-risk situational tools, employed sparingly due to the vulnerability of operators and the logistical burden of fuel. Casualty rates in previous engagements Guadalcanal, Saipan, and even Iwo Jima were painfully high. Operators were often singled out by defenders, targeted for the simple fact that their weapons represented both immediate threat and psychological terror. Leyte demonstrated that careful engineering, combined with meticulous coordination and tactical innovation, could drastically reduce exposure while amplifying destructive effect. The dual-stream system, with its adjustable nozzles and quick connect reloads, had proven that small modifications could have outsized impact. But equally important was the recognition that human factors fear, expectation, and doctrine were as vulnerable to exploitation as concrete and timber. Japanese soldiers had trained their entire military lives to rely on fortifications, believing in the near impenetrability of their defenses. Whitaker's flamethrowers undermined that certainty. The destruction of Gamma, Hotel, and Juliet within a single day forced defenders to reconsider everything they thought they knew about protection, strategy, and survival. As Whitaker later reflected, it was never simply about burning bunkers, it was about changing the mental landscape of the battlefield. The immediate operational consequences were undeniable. Leyte became a staging ground for subsequent advances deeper into the Philippines. Supply lines could be maintained with greater confidence, as fortified positions that might have threatened convoys were systematically neutralized. Casualty figures for American infantry decreased relative to previous campaigns in similar terrain, a testament not just to the flamethrower innovation itself, but to the integration of new tactics with reconnaissance, suppressive fire, and logistical planning. Each success validated a philosophy Whitaker had long believed, that adaptation, observation, and disciplined experimentation could overcome even the most daunting defensive structures. Yet, the lessons extended beyond Leyte. Field reports noted that Japanese defenders, after witnessing the speed and efficiency of these assaults, became increasingly cautious in subsequent campaigns. They deepened tunnels, added secondary apertures, and attempted to create decoy fortifications to mislead flamethrower teams. In turn, American units refined tactics further, emphasizing pre-assault mapping, staggered multi-team approaches, and coordinated suppressive fire. In essence, the Leyte operation had catalyzed an evolutionary cycle in battlefield tactics, in which innovation prompted countermeasures, which in turn demanded further adaptation. This cycle, repeated across the Pacific theater, was a microcosm of modern warfare's iterative nature, constant adjustment, testing, and improvement under the pressure of survival. Whitaker's own reflections emphasized the human dimension. He often spoke not of personal glory, but of the courage, discipline, and coordination that made the operation possible. Each operator, rifleman, and assistant contributed to an outcome that no single individual could achieve alone. The design of the flamethrower was only one part of a larger system: training, observation, and the willingness to act decisively under extreme stress were equally critical. In oral histories collected decades later, former team members consistently highlighted the importance of teamwork and trust. Sergeant Alan McBride recalled, "We knew the flamethrower was dangerous. Every operator was exposed. But what made the difference was knowing your guys were watching your back. Every move, every second counted. The weapon alone didn't win. It was all of us working together." This human-centric perspective underscores a central theme of the Leyte operation. Warfare is never solely about technology. While Whitaker's modifications allowed flamethrowers to achieve unprecedented results, the psychological resilience, discipline, and mutual trust of his teams amplified their effect. In every sense, the operation was a study in applied human ingenuity, a demonstration of how intellect, engineering, and courage can combine to reshape outcomes on a violent and unforgiving battlefield. The broader strategic significance cannot be overstated. Leyte was critical not merely for the territory it secured, but for the precedent it set. The successful deployment of modified flamethrowers influenced planning for subsequent assaults on fortified positions across the Philippines and later Okinawa. It reinforced the principle that small, targeted innovations could produce effects far beyond the scale of the unit employing them. Army and Marine Corps manuals were updated to include lessons from Leyte, emphasizing multi-aperture targeting, rapid reload procedures, and integrated suppressive tactics. Whitaker's work became part of the institutional memory of Pacific operations, informing doctrine long after the immediate campaign ended. For Japanese defenders, the implications were grim. The assumption that fortifications could guarantee survival had been irrevocably challenged. Reports from captured officers and post-war diaries reveal a deep sense of disorientation. Positions once deemed impregnable were no longer safe. Tactics designed to exploit linear assaults had failed against simultaneous multi-aperture fire. The destruction of Gamma, Hotel, and Juliet became emblematic of a broader tactical vulnerability, a realization that structural engineering alone could not compensate for adaptive, disciplined innovation. The psychological ripple effect influenced defensive planning in subsequent battles, including Mindoro and Luzon, where Japanese forces increasingly relied on deception and dispersal rather than the concentrated fortresses that had dominated earlier campaigns. Whitaker himself continued to advocate for innovation throughout the remainder of the war. As American forces advanced toward Luzon and the Ryukyu Islands, he consulted with engineering units, tactical planners, and ordnance officers, emphasizing the need to balance technological refinement with practical field application. He stressed that modifications must be rigorously tested, integrated into operational doctrine, and trained in realistic conditions. His work reinforced a core principle of modern military thought, that innovation is effective only when combined with disciplined execution and situational awareness. By early 1945, Leyte's northern ridges had become a case study in military adaptation. Academic analyses in the decades following the war highlight several enduring lessons. The integration of technological modification and human coordination can dramatically alter operational outcomes. The psychological impact of innovation on enemy forces is as significant as material destruction, and battlefield success depends as much on observation, planning, and discipline as it does on raw firepower. Leyte stands as a microcosm of these principles, demonstrating the interplay of ingenuity, courage, and tactical foresight under the crucible of combat. Whitaker's personal legacy, though not widely celebrated outside specialized historical circles, remains a testament to the power of disciplined creativity. His modifications were not flashy or glamorous. They were practical, methodical, and rooted in rigorous observation. Yet they produced consequences that reshaped operational expectations and altered the course of engagements across the Pacific. Oral histories and post-war interviews consistently emphasize that the Leyte operation exemplified a broader truth. In war, disciplined innovation can eclipse brute strength, and small, thoughtful improvements can yield effects far beyond their apparent scale. As Leyte was secured, Whitaker reflected on the arc of his experience. From the initial skepticism his design faced, to the rapid, decisive destruction of multiple fortresses, to the broader adoption of his innovations across the Pacific theater, the operation illustrated a fundamental truth about warfare. Even the most entrenched assumptions can be overturned through careful study, disciplined experimentation, and the courage to act decisively. The fortresses that fell in 24 hours were not just destroyed, they symbolized a shift in understanding, a tangible demonstration that innovation, precision, and human ingenuity could redefine what was possible in combat. In retrospect, the Leyte operation also serves as a cautionary tale. It underscores that technological advantage alone is insufficient without proper training, coordination, and psychological insight. Whitaker's success was as much about the discipline, trust, and adaptability of his teams as it was about the flamethrower itself. The interplay of human factors and technical innovation, exemplified in the Leyte campaign, remains a central theme in military studies. Effective systems are not built solely from materials, but from people applying insight, creativity, and courage under extreme conditions. By the time American forces moved on to subsequent operations in Mindoro, Luzon, and Okinawa, the lessons of Leyte had been internalized. The destruction of fortresses in 24 hours became not merely a tactical anecdote, but a doctrinal milestone, influencing planning, training, and operational expectations across the Pacific theater. Whitaker's work exemplified a fundamental principle. Even in the vast, complex machinery of modern war, small-scale innovation, when applied thoughtfully, can produce outsized consequences. In the years after the war, military historians revisited Leyte repeatedly. The dual-stream flamethrower was cited as an early example of human-centered engineering in combat, demonstrating how observation, adaptation, and disciplined execution could yield transformative results. Whitaker himself remained humble, emphasizing the collaborative nature of the success. The operators, assistants, riflemen, and commanders who implemented the system in the field had made its effectiveness possible. He reflected that the true measure of innovation in war is not how clever an idea is in theory, but whether it can survive under the stress, chaos, and brutality of combat. Ultimately, Leyte's northern ridges stand as both a historical episode and a symbolic testament. The 3 fortresses that burned in 24 hours were more than concrete and timber reduced to ash. They were monuments to the power of ingenuity under fire, the decisive impact of human psychology on operational outcomes, and the enduring value of disciplined adaptation. Whitaker's flamethrower modification was not simply a tool of destruction. It was a catalyst for change, a demonstration that even in the most entrenched, conventional theaters of war, bold but measured innovation could rewrite expectations, save lives, and redefine the rules of engagement. In reflecting on Leyte, one is reminded of the broader lesson that transcends any single battle. History is shaped not only by the weapons we wield, but by the insight, courage, and creativity we bring to their use. In the Pacific theater, Whitaker's flamethrowers embodied that principle, turning skepticism into operational advantage, and proving that in war, as in life, the willingness to think differently and to act decisively on that thought can change the course of events in ways that seem almost impossible until they are achieved. The fortresses have long since crumbled completely, reclaimed by jungle and soil, but their story remains. The engineers, soldiers, and commanders who witnessed the events of October 1944 carried the lessons forward, shaping doctrine, informing training, and influencing strategy. Whitaker's innovation, once mocked as absurd, now stands as an enduring reminder. In the crucible of combat, even the smallest modification, applied with insight and courage, can produce results that echo far beyond the battlefield. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.